at C Security Technologies, Maytal Brooks-Kempler, and I24 News Senior International Affairs Correspondent Owen Alterman. Maytal, Owen, a pleasure to have you. Maytal, let's look at the cybersecurity and national security element of this, which of course work hand in hand. First of all, tell us a bit about this platform Gab that investigators are looking at now, that we saw those final words that are being linked to Bauer. How does something like this kind of rhetoric that continued since at least January 2018 go undetected?
First of all, Gab is a social media that talks about free speech. That's what they aim to do. That's what they want to do. They don't want to limit the sort of messages that are out there, unlike Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, that you see a lot of scrutiny and you see the ability to report certain posts for being harmful or biased or offensive in any way. So Gab does not want to limit its actual content. They want people to talk about anything they want. So that's the point with Gab. And we see that all over the place. We see it in hate crime, hate speech. We see it in anti-Semitism. We see it in anti-vaccines. Everything on Gab, you can see it.
And what do you say to that? The fact that these kind of websites are able to exist and go absolutely, you know, some of the former employees and employees of Gab have said they'd rather this kind of rhetoric be above ground than below ground. They see it as a community service almost.
Well, look, it shows that this is a bit of a strategy of swatting flies. Obviously, it's easy to put pressure on the big guns in social media, on Facebook and on Twitter, and they've faced a whole lot of pressure, as we all know, over this very issue. But again, it seems that activists and extremists can simply go onto other platforms and start their own platforms and find other ways to communicate with each other. In the United States, Tracy, with the First Amendment and the emphasis on freedom of expression, it's very, very difficult to shut sites like this down unless they're calling to immediate violence. And even in the case of this, by the way, when he talks about on the platform he wants to change the optics and he's going in, it's not immediately clear that that's violence and incitement to violence. It's hard to even see how that could be shut down. You know, obviously there can be pressure on this platform, but then they'll simply go to another one.
So what can law enforcement do about that? Because of course there have been many incidents where terrorists or mass murderers mention a particular political stance or an intent to go and carry out these heinous acts on social media before going ahead and doing it. So what can be done, I suppose, in the cybersphere?
Well, it's more of a matter of national security than actual cyber security, or actually a combination between both, because there's nothing new. In the past it was Facebook. 10 years ago it was more on Google or on the darknet. Now it's on Gab and other sites. So I agree with what Owen said regarding being out there, that Gab is saying that they want to be out there, not underneath the surface, because that's the difference between the darknet and the regular internet.
And what makes this incident unique? Of course, he talked about this organisation called HIAS, and this is what he was primarily fixated on. How does that play into the broader narrative of what fueled this crime?
Well, Tracy, for people here in Israel and for American Jews, what makes this unique is the target was a synagogue. And that this is the worst act of anti-Semitic murder in the history of the United States. And again, this is the country with the world's second largest Jewish community, with a Jewish history going on about 300 years or more, if you go back to the original group that went to then New Amsterdam under the Dutch. Look, so it's a traumatic event for the American Jewish community. HIAS is an organization that goes back to the 19th century that was founded to absorb Jewish immigrants and refugees who came to the United States. As the stream of Jewish refugees and immigrants dried up, like a lot of Jewish organizations, I suspect HIAS was looking for a new way to continue its mission and found it in terms of helping refugees and immigrants who weren't Jewish, and that became the target of this shooter who saw in this some kind of Jewish conspiracy to flood, as he would see it, unwelcome immigrants and migrants into the United States, fed into his thinking, and
that plays more broadly into the narrative of the United States and migrants at the moment.
Plays into the narrative of anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists like this person who did this, who see Jews as a part of a conspiracy against the white majority in the United States, to flood the United States with racial minorities, to change the makeup of the United States. I'm not entirely sure to what end, but that's a conspiracy theory that flourishes in certain corners of the internet and society.
And Maytal, how do social media platforms identify red flags when it comes to hate speech?
Well, it really depends on the platform. Some will rely more heavily on actual users reporting these posts. Some have their own mechanisms to identify certain keywords, phrases, sort of speech, the entire speech, where you go to, what sort of groups you're associated with, and to try to identify it. Now, the technology is there. It has been there for probably 15, 20 years. The question is, how much will social media, and again, it differs between the different ones, will want to investigate these sort of posts and speech.
How does it work, though? Are there bots that go through the system and identify certain words or certain phrasing?
Some, but mostly it will be, well, I'm not familiar with all of the social medias and what sort of mechanism they use, but again, recognizing keywords, phrases is nothing new. We use them in cybersecurity all the time, for example, in data leak protection mechanisms. So they will go through the entire content of an organization and try and find specific key phrases to try and identify where your assets will be. So social media will use exactly the same methods to try and find offensive.
Do you believe that the avenues in terms of through which people can report to the social media platform themselves are robust enough?
Depends which ones. I actually did use the reporting mechanism, for example, in Facebook quite a few times when I saw hate speech and other things that shouldn't be on Facebook, at least in my eyes. And they did come back to me quite fast. It probably took about between 24 and 48 hours, which is not bad. But is it fast enough to actually notify law enforcement? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure they will have the capabilities to actually look through all of these different posts and try to understand, is it something worth reporting?
All right, Maytal Brooks Kempler, Owen Alterman, thank you for that insight. We're going out for a quick break. On the other side of this,